we knew that in April 23, the registration for the build for your buildings opened. And also we have the deadline by the end of September for registering the existing high-rise residential blocks. In the beginning of October, the registration opens for the new high-rise residential blocks. And then looking forwards to April next year, which is when the building safety regulator will start issuing the building safety assessment certificates and calling up from landlords to start reviewing the building safety cases. What really time is involved in preparing the safety cases? I know it's probably a frequently asked question across the sector. So my first key question I would ask is, do you have the resource in-house? Maybe a difficult question as well. I know there is a lot of resource constraints across the sector. But just from experience, if you would have more than 5 high-rise residential blocks, you really should be having dedicated individuals working on it full time if you were to be doing it in-house. I think it really just highlights, so what I wanted to briefly talk through is just, I broke it down into 4 key steps here, which is the, what I would say, the 4 milestones and things which have to be achieved, which have really a separate time frame on its own as part of the process. So the first step being undertaking the gap analysis. Well, there may be many organisations that may have already covered that one off. And then it's filling the gaps and building the information. That could involve various surveying required, could involve getting fire engineers, senior fire consultants involved to put together fire strategies. And I think from our experience, within that, just that process there, it would take at least 2 months. And I appreciate if you could run it as a particular whole program, and if you have multiple blocks, but from start to finish, by the time you instruct, by the time you get engineers involved, by the time you get reports back and reviewed, you're talking about a 2-month process. Bearing in mind there might be multiple surveys being required at this point. And then there is the larger section, which is the drafting the building safety case. Well, this process, we all know that there's no pre-agreed template which we can all rely upon, but this is a significant time frame which you do need to allow within your plan for the production of the safety case for each individual block. As we all know, it's not a copy and paste job, regardless of whether you have multiple sites, multiple blocks which are very similar on the same sites, but every block has to be treated individually once all the information has been reviewed. And then the last step is, once you've done all the surveying, you've even put together your draft building safety case, then at that point, it's recommended that you'd put together your remediation action plan, which is again a document which you can present to the regulator.
What is BIM? Some of you probably know. Essentially, it's a centralized database of spatially related information for a building. That's my definition. There are a million definitions. It's not a new concept. It's just new in this sector. At the end of the day, if you want the most efficient building, you want to gather as much information about all the parts of the building and put it in one place and make it easily accessible for everyone, all the stakeholders and contractors and things. So the basic level 3D, you could think of this as just geometry. We need to start with building elements and putting those into a 3D model. From those elements, we essentially have metadata, such as how many treads there are on this staircase, what's the fire rating of the door, what's the structural capacity of a load-bearing wall, and this is sort of referred to as the digital twin. It's probably quite a good way of putting it, actually, because you are basically making a digital version, a virtual model of your existing building. The key here is in the information. Metadata is extremely important. That model is essentially done until you apply data to all of the elements, and then we can start extracting things from it. Okay, so some of this stuff seems quite obvious, but it's extremely important to point out You know, we have these hierarchies within our businesses. The vision normally comes from the top, but you have to get everyone to adopt and everyone to see the value and the potential of this actually making their lives easier as well. So you need a clear vision, and obviously we have our purpose. Garbage in, garbage out. We need the correct information from the start, and we need as much information we can from the start. It's definitely front heavy, but once that building model is created, it's just a case of staying on top of it. Single point storage, again, quite obvious, but this method does enforce you to do that because it's all based around the model. So if the model's up to date, then everything should be up to date. I did just touch on ownership. It's important for you as an owner to own your digital twin, if you like. And then again, touched on this, but having some awareness and some basic training to actually be able to get the most out of this system. So if you're looking to redesign, do a refurb or something, you can understand what's there, what's the impact if I pull that particular wall out. Will it cause structural failure, or is it a demountable partition, for example? If I want to install a new pipe system, will it clash with any existing systems that are already present? We've got the schedules again. Just being able to pull out the square footage of all of your hallways if you want to recarpet them, for example. You can pull this information really quickly and share it with contractors for value. We've got the golden thread, which is essentially what we're talking about now, introducing all of that historical information and keeping a log of everything. And then the final one, which is sort of, it's not new, but it's new in reference to sort of BIM and building safety. Facility management softwares. What would be really nice is that we can take this BIM model, take all of the information and put it into one online system where a facility manager could take their mobile phone to site and log if a light's gone out, or if the monthly checks have been carried out on the fire list, and log all of that and link it all back into the same system.
So firstly, we'll look at resident engagement strategies. And really, resident engagement is at the heart of what the Building Safety Act wants to achieve in terms of its new regulatory framework compliance moving forwards. And really that can be drawn back to Dame Hackett's independent report, which has been around some time now. She issued her final report back in 2018. And that was the first real finding in her report, that she felt residents had not previously had strong enough of a voice in the management of buildings, obviously echoing some of the criticisms following the Grenfell tragedy. And so the recommendation there was that a much more stringent regulatory regime should be put in place in terms of putting residents at the heart of building safety decisions and being able to engage and consult and bring residents along with those that are ultimately making decisions about the building itself and the safety of buildings moving forwards. But if you are the principal accountable person for a high risk building, which, as I mentioned, is a building over 18 metres or 7 stories in height, then you will be required to prepare a resident engagement strategy. And really, at the most general basic principle, that strategy, that primary function of that strategy, is to ensure that residents are promoted in terms of their participation in making building safety decisions about that building. And a building safety decision is basically any decision made by an accountable person. So again, it doesn't have to be just the principal accountable person, it's any decision by an accountable person about how that building is managed, or the performance of that accountable person or other accountable people in the building with their duties under the Act. So in terms of what actually we have to set out in the strategy document itself, well, firstly, the Act itself, so the section 91 that I mentioned earlier, does set out some real key information that the strategy must contain. We expect to see more detailed regulations being issued by the Secretary of State in terms of anything else, in terms of its form, how it's likely to need to be provided, or any of the details that the strategy might need to include. But at the most broadest level, it will need to include those 4 points that I've mentioned on this slide. So 1, the information which will be provided to residents about how building safety decisions will be made in terms of its management of the building and how accountable person will engage with and comply with their duties under the Act. When residents will expect to be consulted about these decisions, how that consultation will take place. So what are the arrangements for that? How will those views be obtained, and how will they actually be taken into account? And also ensuring that the strategy itself sets out the means for measuring whether that strategy is working. How is it kept under review? How is it kept appropriate? What methods are being used to ensure that the strategy remains relevant? It means that it's kept under review and that it ultimately works. Resident duties, how does resident liaison actually work in practice? Well, most of you who have well-drafted leases and tenancy agreements have already probably got sufficient wording within those to ensure that their residents and occupiers don't do anything that might cause a building safety risk. But if not, or perhaps to bolster those, there is these new sections within Section 95 of the Act requiring residents to ensure that they don't act in a way that causes a significant risk of a building safety risk materialising, not to interfere with relevant safety items, so anything in common parts that's intended to improve the safety of anyone in the building, and also to comply with requests from accountable persons to provide information or be able for them to perform their duties under the Act. And if they don't do those things, there is now a contravention notice process where a notice can be served, and if needs be, you can go to the county court to get an injunction to compel them to either provide that information or to stop doing or to do certain actions and requirements. Again, very similar to what I imagine is already within your tenancy agreements and leases.